We have Ram with IGC Pharma.
Thank you all for coming. I see Shelley back there. And Jack, thank you for coming. So my name is Ram Mukunda. I'm the CEO of IGC Pharma. We are in the Alzheimer's space. And so I grew up in Maryland and in Connecticut. I have degrees in mathematics as well as in engineering, and I have a very strong STEM background. I started my first company in 1991. It was called StarTech. I took it public on NASDAQ. And that company was then eventually sold. I then started IGC, and we, in 2014, started looking at the cannabis space. And we looked at how cannabinoids could help people suffering from a variety of ailments and diseases. One of our advisors, name is Dr. Saunders. He's a professor at a local university in Maryland. He put us on to the University of South Florida. And in the University of South Florida, they had been working for about 5 to 7 years on using THC, which is the psychoactive compound found in the marijuana or the cannabis plant, using that and in combination with other molecules they were looking at dementia and they were looking at Alzheimer's in particular. So they had a lot of research that they did over the past 7 years, which I'm going to show you, and we're going to go through that. But I want to also introduce Claudia Grimaldi and Andreas. Claudia she has degrees in psychology as well as an MBA, and she's our chief compliance officer as well as our principal financial officer. And during the presentation, we're going to show you what she's been responsible for, which is building out a team that's very cost effective in running trials. So it's almost an internal CRO. And we have Andreas, who's a PhD. He manages our IR program as well as our ESG. So Dr. Saunders, going back to what I was saying, Dr. Saunders introduced us to the University of South Florida, where they had been working on low doses of THC. So this professor found two very interesting novel findings. One, that THC in a low dose acts very differently from THC in a high dose. So THC in a high dose is smoking weed. Whereas when you use it in very low doses, it actually removes certain hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. And I'm going to show you exactly what it does. So we took that research and we took essentially the active pharmaceutical compounds that he had been working on. And we took that and created a formulation. And we took that formulation to the FDA and asked for permission to run a phase 1 trial. And they gave us the permission, and essentially we became the first company to try to actually use THC, which is a psychoactive compound found in cannabis, on Alzheimer's patients. So what we're doing is similar to what GW Pharma did. GW Pharma took CBD, which is the non-psychoactive compound, and they showed that it actually works on seizures and epilepsy. And that company was sold for $7.7 billion in 2021 to Jazz Pharmaceutical. So they did that with CBD. We're actually working on THC. So we're currently, with this formulation, we finished our phase 1. We're currently in a phase 2B trial, which is showing efficacy. And I'm going to go through and show you that. We took that. We also acquired another molecule, which I will describe. And we also have OTC products, which help us get revenue today while we're working on getting these molecules through the FDA process. So we're completely vertical. We are vertically integrated. Our headquarters is in Potomac, Maryland. and we have our manufacturing facilities in Vancouver, Washington, which is next to Portland. We also have a tie-up with the largest grower of cannabis in Colombia, South America. This allows us to get THC and actually work on all the different cannabinoids like THC, CBD, CBG, CBN without having to worry about federal laws. We have a license to work with controlled substances in Colombia. That's why we are part of the reason why we're there. We have our analytics and our accounting in India. We have 4 patents that we control in the Alzheimer's space. We also have something happened. Yes. All right. There we go. We also have patents for seizures in cats and dogs. We have a patent in pain. We are very active with our patent portfolio. These are patents that have been awarded in the U.S. We've also filed and some of them have been awarded in many different countries, probably 20 or 30 different countries. Essentially, we have 2 areas of focus. One is the pharmaceutical, and I described how we got to the Alzheimer's space. And the other is the over-the-counter wellness products that we have, that we manufacture and sell today. So coming back to Alzheimer's, we all know and intuitively what dementia is. The loss of memory, and it's a loss of abstract thinking. And over time, it gets worse. Alzheimer's is a disease that accounts for about 70 to 80% of all dementia. The probability of getting Alzheimer's is very high as you age. So aging is a risk factor, but it's not the primary cause of Alzheimer's. With Alzheimer's, you also have the disease itself, and individuals as the actual hallmarks or the disease itself can start when you're 40, 45, but the symptoms don't manifest for 20 years. So they don't manifest till in your 60s. And by the time you get to 80, there's a 50% chance that you might get Alzheimer's. So the risk is very high. There is no cure for Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is associated with many different neuropsychiatric symptoms like agitation, anxiety, depression. These neuropsychiatric symptoms accelerate as the disease progresses. And there's a linkage between agitation, for example, and the actual disease itself. So as the disease progresses, all these symptoms get worse. It affects about 6.5 million people in the US. And right now, by 2050, we are expected, this is just the US, to spend $1 trillion on Alzheimer's. Dementia and Alzheimer's, it's a staggeringly large number. Worldwide, there are about 50 to 55 million people that are affected by Alzheimer's. And for everyone with Alzheimer's, there's a caregiver and there's a family. So if you think about who's affected, it's more like 4 times that number. There are 2 hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. Remember what I said about dementia. We know intuitively what dementia is. Alzheimer's is a disease that accounts for about 80% of all dementia cases. There are 2 hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. One is plaques, and these plaques start to deposit 20 years before any of the symptoms. The plaques are proteins that deposit between neurons. So imagine this room full of neurons, each of you being a neuron, with the plaque depositing between each of you, which means you can't communicate with each other. So it cuts off that. Second thing that happens in Alzheimer's is that the neuron dies from within. So if you look at the room and there are 50 neurons, 25 of them disappear, suddenly you have memory loss. So these are the two hallmarks of Alzheimer's, the deposit of plaques and the other one's called tangles. Essentially, we have two molecules in the Alzheimer's space. The first one is called TGR63. It's a molecule that removes plaque. And the second one in preclinical, which I'm going to show you, also does the same. So if you look at our formulation, which is the IGC81, which is the second molecule, this is a molecule that in preclinical has shown to remove plaque and also to slow down the neuronal death from the tangles. So it does both. It also increases mitochondrial output, and it's non-toxic. It does a lot of other stuff. But this was the major finding. Now, this particular formulation, if you remember, it's THC in ultra low doses along with other molecules. So it's very different from smoking weed. This is a pharmaceutical product. The other thing that was shown is that in preclinical, it improved memory in mice that have been genetically modified to have Alzheimer's. So this is the APP-PS1 mouse, which is a transgenic mouse with Alzheimer's. And the experiments showed that memory improved in the mouse model. So these were two. So we took all of this data. We refiled many of the patents that USF had filed, and we've been awarded 2 of the patents. So this particular formulation is protected by patents, both in the US, Canada, Mexico, and about 20 other countries. And what we did was we took this to the FDA. We showed them all the preclinical data, along with the mouse models and the tox studies, and we asked for permission to run a phase 1 study to determine its safety and tolerability in humans with Alzheimer's. So we did that, and what we discovered was, and we presented this back to the FDA, no life-threatening or any serious adverse events, perfectly safe at 3 different doses, once a day, twice a day, and 3 times a day, and tolerable for the Alzheimer's population. But during that trial, we also looked at neuropsychiatric symptoms associated with Alzheimer's. So we looked at agitation, we looked at anxiety, we looked at depression, irritability, we looked at the whole gamut of neuropsychiatric symptoms. Now, we started by saying this is a disease-modifying formulation. So technically, we should have been running a trial to look to see if it reduces beta-amyloid plaque, which is plaques, and if it improves neuroinflammation and all of those things. That takes time. And we certainly plan to use this and go down that path. But what we discovered in the phase 1 was that it decreased neuropsychiatric symptoms. Now, there's a scale called the NPI, and when you look at the 3 different doses, you can see that at baseline, for example, if you imagine there's a scale that measures neuropsychiatric symptoms, it's 31.5. After 15 days of dosing, it was halved. This is on once a day, on twice a day, on 3 times a day. So the trend line is very promising. So we took this data and we looked at individual components like agitation, anxiety, depression. And on the agitation scale, for example, in baseline it's 4.7 for once a day dosing, and it came down to 3. With 2 times a day dosing, it went from 4.3 to 1.5. Significant drop. 4.2 to 1.4, and all of these with p-values less than 0.05, which essentially says that there is it's statistically significant that these decreases happened because of the drug and not because of some random event. We also talked to the caregivers, and the feedback from the caregivers was phenomenal. They said it was easier to manage the patients while they were on this drug. They were the patients actually behaved in a way that was much more conducive. So when we looked at the data, as I said, we found that it decreased agitation. I can show you data that it also decreased anxiety and depression. But there's no drug for agitation in dementia due to Alzheimer's. Antipsychotics are used currently, and they come with black box warnings, which basically say to use this, there could be a fatality, there could be lots of other things that can go wrong. Agitation impacts about 76% of patients with Alzheimer's. So this was a very interesting area. Agitation also is the largest reason for a higher admission rate to hospitals and to nursing homes. It's the leading cause of separation of families. So the patient with Alzheimer's has to be sent to a home because the caregiver can no longer take care of this patient. Agitation is defined in a complex way. Intuitively, you can think of it as aggression or aggressive behavior, which is, kicking stuff, punching, the usual stuff. Verbal agitation, intuitively, you know what that means, yelling, screaming, those kinds of things. And this is what the patients do. So we presented all this data to the FDA after the phase 1, and we asked for permission to go to phase 2 or phase 2B, which is what we're doing now. It's 146 patients. Patient population is 146. We're looking at 13 different sites. The patient enrollment has started. The actual trial is underway. We currently have about 6 sites signed up. We're talking to 20 others. The idea is that we will accelerate this to about 13 different sites, 13 to 15 sites, and try and finish the trial by either the end of this year or by January of next year. But this trial is not just looking at Alzheimer's patients. At the very top, the patient has to have Alzheimer's, but they also have to have agitation. So this is a trial with 146 patients that have agitation in dementia from Alzheimer's. And that's what it's a placebo-controlled trial. Half of them will get placebo, half of them will get the actual drug. And the idea is to show that the drug or the intervention actually helps reduce agitation. And if this works, hopefully patients can stay with their families longer. Patients become more easier to manage. So we've assembled a very strong team, and Claudia is, partly responsible for assembling this team. We have 3 medical doctors, a neuropsychiatrist. We have our principal scientist from the NIH. We are headquartered in Potomac, Maryland, which is right next to the NIH. So we have a lot of access. Our senior clinical researcher has a PhD from Germany. Our scientific manager is engineer. The 2 inventors, the inventor of the professor at University of South Florida, and the professor that invented TGR63 are both very close to us. We consult with them. They work very closely with us. We've assembled a scientific advisory team. Our board of directors has Claudia, myself, and 3 other individuals, including an ex-congressman from Virginia. So this is our pharmaceutical focus. It's primarily Alzheimer's, We have other stuff in the pipeline. We have 2 molecules that are in the Alzheimer's space. We're working on a 3rd and a 4th. But the other area that we work on is over-the-counter products. Over-the-counter products, essentially, our products are focused on women. They're made by women, for women. We're focused on PMS and dysmenorrhea, sleep disorders, fitness, wellness, and these products are on sale now. We generate revenue from this, and they're all non-GMO. Our vision, of course, is to go beyond this and create a safe space for women to have a conversation about each of these ailments. And we're working on that. It's an online virtual space, if you will. The facilities that were built out on the West Coast, that's where we make all the products. That's where it's a GMP facility. We've applied for 211, which is the pharmaceutical grade for manufacturing, so that when we go to phase 3, we will actually have a manufacturing center where we can make the drug. But currently, our revenue is starting to ramp up. I'm pushing to get to about $1 million a quarter in the next 2 quarters. That's essentially what we're working on. But the value, or the longer term value, really comes from the work that we're doing in the Alzheimer's space. Let's hypothetically assume that our drug gets approved. And our whole vision is to be able to sell this drug for $100 to $200 a month. So it's like 4 times less than some of the antipsychotics, significantly less than the other Alzheimer's medications, which are in the thousands of dollars a month. Because the market is so large, if you assume 15 million people with Alzheimer's, 11 million or 76% have agitation, with a 3 to 10% penetration or adoption rate. Our revenue with $100 to $200 a month could be between $500 million to almost $3 billion. So the potential is huge. Just to give you an idea of valuations in the market, currently we have a market value of about market cap of 22 million. If you look at other companies that are in the phase 2 or transitioning from a phase 1 to phase 2, they're all in the 200 to 300 million. GW Pharma that I mentioned earlier that worked on CBD, when they hit phase 1/phase 2, they were almost at 400 million and they were sold for 7.2 billion to Jazz Pharmaceuticals. Now, to bridge to sort of gap that we have in valuations, we're addressing. We've just started a investor relations program. We're starting a public relations program. We're coming to conferences like this. We're telling our story, and with a lot of feedback from individuals here, we are improving the presentation and the slides and the story. So we're working on improving this and essentially trying to close this gap. Thank you. So the trial will cost us $4 million. We reported 5. We're talking to our major investors about a line of credit, which I'm hoping to close. So hopefully we'll have about 17 million, access to about 17 million by, let's say, the end of May. Yeah. We're also applying for grants, with NIH and others for non-dilutive funding. No, the trial will be finished. 15 sites. Each site does 1 patient, between 1 and 2 patients. Let's call it 1 patient. So you take 146 divided by 15 sites. Yes, correct. End of the year it might go over to January. Right. So North America, US and Canada. So we're doing, we have McGill, University of Toronto, University of Calgary in Canada, and then the other sites are in the US. Right. So agitation is measured by, right. So there are two major scales that are used. One is called the Cohen-Mansfield, which is CMAI, and the other is called the NPI. So those are scales that are used, and it's administered either by a psychologist or the PI, the principal investigator, might be a neurologist. So they administer the scale at baseline, and then they continue to do it at week 2, week 4, week 6, and then you look at the statistics from there. Sure. Right. Yes. Gary? Right. Sure. Right. Right. Yeah. So what we mean is that the efficacy in preclinical was shown that it was ultra low dose of THC, and he tested it with many other molecules, melatonin, caffeine, other drugs, etc. So it's a combination of the two. And there are technical reasons why the combination is better than just one. And so this is all the data that we had to produce for the FDA. We can go into it if. No. First you get Alzheimer's, and then Alzheimer's people get agitation, anxiety, depression. If you're an anxious person, don't think you're going to get Alzheimer's. It's the other way around. Right. Yes. Yeah. Yes, they're all CBD based. We manufacture it on the West Coast at our facility. That's what I was saying. We're trying to get to 1 million a quarter. We've just launched those. So, yeah. No projections, but my internal goal is to get to 1 million, and then we'll start looking at projections. 60% gross margin. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, we have. We just haven't had time to, but absolutely, we're looking for an ambassador, either a female tennis player, golf, any of those. We're looking for an ambassador. We're looking to do a influencer program, but we've just been so focused on the pharmaceutical side that we just haven't, been able to focus on the other side. Any other questions? With who? With cassava? No. We're not looking for any relationships with pharmaceutical yet, right? We want to get phase 2 data, and then we'll talk. Well, thank you.